Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into the recording. So today, Pre-Law Shadowers, we are joined with Avery Lee, and I'm not going to go ahead and introduce too much. I would like Avery to introduce yourself, but my name is Aisha Jalani, and I'm the founder of Pre-Law Shadowers, and I will be hosting today's session. And then if you would like to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Avery. This is my third year as a lawyer, and half year at this firm. I was at a smaller firm for 3 years, a small IP boutique, doing both trademarks and patent prosecution, which falls under IP. And then I got headhunted by this firm 6 months ago to kind of head the IP section and grow it out. So even though I'm still kind of young in my career, there's a bigger role there, and hopefully I can answer and help you guys out.
Perfect. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. So let's start with, I guess, in a chronological order. One question the students always have for lawyers that are currently practicing is, did you always know that this is what you wanted to do in your future? Or did you have like an unconventional pathway of deciding to go to law school and deciding to become a lawyer?
I always consider myself lucky in that sense that I did have a faint idea that I want to be a lawyer very early on. And then just I felt I did pretty well in high school law class, and I liked the cases and that these were the problems I would be solving in high school, and then I just ran with that. Where I know many people and many of my classmates did switch careers into, and that's also very common.
For sure. I think we have a lot of students that are unsure, especially in their undergrad. And so it's nice to know that you can always switch what you want to do, even if it's not really too late. But I guess it's always great when you know that you were interested in it in high school. And then I just want to move into your more about your undergrad. So you went to Western. Can I ask what made you choose Western for your undergrad?
To be honest, I didn't have I didn't put a huge emphasis on my undergrad. I was so sure that I wanted to go to law school that I wanted to pick a place where was known for having a better kind of student life balance, or balance between studying. And then my best friend was like dead set on going, and so I kind of followed him there. But honestly, it could have been U of T, it could have been York for undergrad at least.
For sure. And then just more on your experience while you were at Western. So, can you tell us more about what you ended up majoring and minoring in, and what your experience was like in terms of what you learned in your undergrad?
Yeah, so first I was majoring psychology, and then I kind of saw a statistic that philosophy majors tend to do better on the LSAT. And so I tacked that on as a double major. And I found that it was really helpful as well, just because there are logic courses and it teaches you how to write arguments earlier. So I thought that made a lot of sense. And overall, I just really like being at Western. And that's also why I stayed there for 6 years with law school as well.
And were there any extracurriculars that you joined while you were at Western during your undergrad? And do you think that, especially any extracurriculars that you highlighted when you were applying for law school?
Yeah, for me, it was just varsity badminton, and that was kind of part of my life there. A lot of my friends are there, and I didn't. Maybe this is unique. I didn't join as many of those like mock trials or pre-law or anything like that. And maybe I should have. But that's just how I chose to do it. I chose to focus on that side and focus on just studying for the LSAT as opposed to beefing my resume up with extracurriculars.
And I guess, I mean, it's clearly it worked out really well for you regardless, which shows that there's no one set path. You don't have to be in all these mooting and mock trial clubs, and that's a guaranteed you're going to get in. And so I think that's something that students can also take note of if they aren't currently involved in a lot of things. It's not the end of the world. And then I want to move into more of your LSAT itself. So how long did you study for the LSAT, and were you doing self-studying, or did you do it as part of a course or with friends?
Mhm. I'm trying to remember how long I studied for. I do remember I did take it twice. The first time I took it was in the summer, which is the most popular one. And I think it was a bit cheap, maybe overly so. I took an online course, which was a bit cheaper and actually wasn't complete. And then I self-studied just based on past exams. And I remember it was pretty stressful actually, but I want to give people hope that, it gets easier actually. The LSAT was actually more stressful just because of the time crunch, where I felt if you had unlimited time, like the questions aren't exactly the hardest if you pick it up. It's more just answering everything within the given time. But once I did take it twice, I got a high enough score where I was fairly confident that I would get in at least somewhere. And so the admission process was fairly straightforward. I applied to 3 schools, and I think the reference letters, stuff like that, wasn't a big deal. Personal statement, just find someone I knew. I think one was even my badminton coach, and yeah, that wasn't too stressful. There was a decision I had to make at the end where I was on the wait list for U of T, and U of T was the rank number 1 at the time, and then Western had already gave me an offer with some money, so I had to decide whether to take it or stay on the wait list. I called U of T, or I emailed the person. I said, "What are the chances? I got this offer here." They were very honest. Like, okay, it's a low chance you're getting in. So I'm like, okay, I'll just go to Western.
For sure. And I just want to speak more about that, the personal statement itself. A lot of students are mainly concerned about, what do I even write about? It is hard to write about yourself, and think about what experience you want to highlight or what different things you think are important or law schools would like. I know this was quite a while ago, but if you could discuss maybe what you remember, how did you start that process of writing? How long did you spend writing it? Did you have anyone kind of editing or reading over it a couple times? If you could just talk about that experience with the personal statement specifically.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. Where it's natural to think, oh, what sets me apart, and the tip for people is like the first sale you make is to yourself, and don't think you're not unique or anything like that. But also you can put a little bit less pressure on yourself by thinking, okay, they don't they don't weight the personal statement that much. I would think of it as something like, unless you say something really weird that somehow overshadows your LSAT score or your grade score, don't worry too much. I remember saying something kind of embarrassing now to look back at it, but it probably didn't matter. I probably said something like how I consider myself like a mediator with my friend group, but like nothing job related because I didn't have any like real job experience. And I just kind of spoke as like, okay, I have that kind of personality. I was always interested in law school.
I think that's a really real answer, because a lot of students, we feel intimidated by the idea of the personal statement, but it's reassuring to know that it's not going to be as heavily weighted. I think that it really depends on the individual's application, what areas they need. Like, I guess if your GPA and your LSAT score isn't, really high, then maybe they'll consider your personal statement a little bit more. But it's all, I guess, relative to the individual. And then my next question for you was more about your law school experience itself. So we see law school stuff in movies and TV, and I kind of want to know, what was it like for you, and was it what you expected going into law school?
Hmm. I guess I didn't see too much on TV for law school wise. Definitely um, there's that kind of contrast for actually practicing, but I'll try to focus on the law school part. Um, I really enjoyed law school, mainly because I really enjoyed what I was learning, and the people there were very friendly. I hear some schools maybe they're more commuter schools, or they're more focused on like really competing with each other and not sharing their notes, stuff like that. But there's none of that there at Western. And I will say though, maybe this is unique. I struggled in my first year, and so that led to some stress for finding jobs, because what I wish someone told me was, or maybe this wouldn't change anything, but um, the first big kind of recruitment is off of your first year grades only. So they don't even see anything and they want to recruit you early. And that's because the US, some time ago, they started poaching Canadian students. And so the Canadian firms moved that up. Um, but I just kept putting my head down, and eventually in second year, things started to click. And there's more flexibility in choosing which courses I could take. And just very simply, like, some would be for exam courses, some would be paper courses. I try to do more paper courses. I felt like you could put more effort in that, and it was less of a crapshoot, and things started to get better there, and more enjoyable. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for being honest about your first year. I think a lot of students think that, with law school, everyone who goes there is just like a very specific type of student and they all just get it immediately. And that's why it's even more intimidating to think about applying or think about potentially going. But I appreciate your honesty in that it's not easy to pick up. And that you have to go through a process of kind of, teaching yourself and learning and figuring it out and getting to terms with it and figuring out what works for you. And we do hear about that 1L summer recruitment. And how intimidating it can be because, like you said, it's based only on your first year grades, which again, first year, even in undergrad, first year is known to be the year where people's grades are not the best. They're adjusting. But I'm glad that everything worked out for you later. And that does give students a little bit of hope that just because you don't get it immediately doesn't mean that law school isn't for you, or that, it's too much for you, it's too difficult for you. You just need to give yourself some time. And so I hope students that are watching are also feeling a little bit reassured hearing that as well. And my next question for you, are there any courses that you took while you were in law school? So I know that there is, they give you a taste of different fields of law and different courses or classes that you're taking. Were there any that really stood out to you that even today you can remember, I had a really great time with this professor in this class, or I loved learning about this specifically?
Yeah. The biggest one for sure was negotiation. Just because I feel like a lot of the other courses, they teach you how to be a judge almost. They give you cases and they tell you, and it's like the fringe 1% cases that you might not use in your practice because those are interesting, stuff like that, yada, yada, yada. And you can make arguments for both sides. But that one was like more, you can simulation, a bit of psychology involved, which goes back to my undergrad, like how the other side thinks, and was more active in that course and broadly applicable to all areas, I think. And then the other one was, at least at Western at the time, not sure if they still have it now, but they had a specific capstone course for intellectual property that, at least at the time, they didn't offer anywhere else, that you could really specialize in that area. And they brought unique speakers in, they brought a judge in, they brought someone that was in the blockchain space in. So it's very wide, very varied and interesting. And I guess the only one I'll highlight, just so because I think it's worth people knowing early on, although I did enjoy my advanced contract class, it's funny thinking back that in both my contract class and advanced contract class, I didn't read a single contract in that class, which is weird. And you think they should teach you that, but you don't learn until you actually go start working.
That's really strange because, I mean, like you said, I would assume it's called contract law and that a lot of maybe your work would be look at the contracts and or draft contracts or whatever it might be. But I did hear that a lot, that with law schools, a lot of what you learn is theory, and it's very, very different to actually working within that field and practicing law. Would you agree that for all fields of law, that's the case?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. And thankfully now are people out there that are kind of helping to bridge the gap. One of my mentors even started an academy called 4L. So normally there's 1, 2, 3 years of law school, and he kind of made his own course to kind of bridge the gap for some of that.
That's really interesting. I think everyone has talked about the idea of that missing 4L, that jump between 3L, and then suddenly you're working and it's very, very different. And while you have, I guess, you probably do obviously learn a lot of good skills while you're in law school that help you become a better lawyer. But I've heard this from every lawyer we've had on pre-law chatter's. They all say the same thing about how it's very, very different. One, to obviously what you hear about and what you see on TVs and movies, of that law school is very cutthroat and competitive and scary and all these things. And I'm just wondering more about when you were at Western Law, what was the social life like? Because of course we know Western for undergrad is known to have a really good balance for student life, plus also, and campus life with also your your academics. But with Western Law, was that a similar case? Was there a lot of social life? Were there a lot of extracurricular students could do while they were in law school?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are associations there as well. People have their own groups. I had my own group, but I was a bit more introverted. I didn't go to all the events or drinking events, but there were like a ton. Like at least at Western, I think every Wednesday there was like some type of drinking event.
So that's, I mean, it's good to know that you can still, again, the misconception is you're a law student, you're going to have no life and you're going to have no time. And while I'm sure you must have a very, very busy schedule in law school, it's nice to know that there are, like set days or different groups and associations, because you are all in the same boat. And it's nice to know that there is, at least at Western, and I'm sure this is the case now, especially with a lot of other law schools, because of the whole issue of mental health with law students and the current practicing lawyers that wasn't being discussed before. And I'm glad that there's now an attempt to work on that balance. And I guess my next question for you is, did you always know that this is the field of law you want to be practicing in, or when you were in law school, was there something else that you were leaning towards before you actually finished and graduated?
Yeah, I did not know it would be this area. And if I knew, I may have done a different undergrad, because this is the area I chose is the only area that kind of requires you to have a specific undergrad. And that would be science or engineering, to be a patent lawyer, stuff like that. So it was very hard for me to get in the door to show that I was serious, that I wanted to be in the area, even though I'm doing trademarks now, and you do not need a science background to protect brand names. That's just how it is. They usually get those types of students to do both, and they hire them early on. I can't really remember what type of lawyer I was thinking. I think I was pretty general. I think I didn't ask enough questions to see what these types of law really entail before I went into law school. So I didn't actually have that good of an idea. I think I was pretty open to, it was more so that I was open to almost all types of law, except maybe family. And then I did volunteer. I did some legal work for criminal and got a taste of those other fields as well before landing in IP. And I found that based on one story that my old boss told me, that he'd said a lawyer got put at gunpoint and dropped the case, or I'll kill her family. And his response was like, I would have definitely, despite the risks to my family, I would have kept going. And I'm like, I don't think I would. So I don't think that area is right for me. I think I'd rather be safer in the businessy law type of area where the client isn't coming to me because they're unhappy or they're that type of problem. They're coming because they want to increase the value of the business.
So I think it all depends on the kind of person that you are when it comes to deciding what field you want to practice in. Obviously, what you're interested in, but also what aligns with your personality and your skills. And I think that the kind of field of law that you're in, so with trademarks and IP law, it's very interesting to a lot of students because we're used to the typical criminal, family, tax, like just the very I don't want to say mainstream, but the ones that are more heard of. And so it's interesting to see that you got into this field that I would say is more niche, in my opinion. And my question for you is, what do you like the most about what you do? And then what do you dislike the most? Like, not something you hate, that's not, isn't the greatest, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I guess let's start with what I dislike, or which is where the disconnect comes in on what you see on TV and the kind of thing. My idea of a lawyer was like negotiating with another lawyer kind of thing, going to court. And so at least a big part of it, at least when I was at the other firm I was at, was just me making arguments to the government. We file an application. If they reject it, we write arguments to them. And I actually like that part. You can get really creative and try to get your client's application approved. But at least at the other firm, I rarely had any back and forth with other lawyers. And so I kind of wanted that negotiation side, more like excitement, that TV lawyer side of things, and that there is that with the contract drafting and litigation, but that crosses over to some other areas. And so I also didn't realize how niche it could be, that even within trademarks, you could just be doing what they call prosecution, which is a weird word, even though you're not prosecuting a person on the stand, you're prosecuting an application. And litigation licensing is the other stream, where after you get the application, you're making deals with other people. Maybe they want to use your brand as well.
Okay, perfect. And then another question I have is, if you could what people are most curious about is, what is your a typical day for you within your career? So I know that every day must be a little bit different and not every day is the exact same. But I'm assuming, I can see from your background, I'm assuming that you're in person now. And then just what it is that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it's emails or clients or meetings or whatever it might be, like a typical day in your life, basically.
Mm-hmm. Right now I'm in my office. I'm splitting my time here and home. Firm's fairly flexible on that, which is nice. Recently I've been doing more networking and trying to build up the practice, which may be less common when you first start off. When you first start off, it's probably all just like, whereas at my old firm, it was just, everything was just someone giving me work and I do it. And now I'm trying to get more work myself and kind of pushing these files along. And the day-to-day is usually right in the beginning, I check my emails to see if I have anything that I can just get out of the way immediately. And in the days prior, I also like save tasks to do for each day. And there's like a docketing system that kind of alerts you, hey, this deadline's coming up 2 weeks, or check on the status of this. And so it's a mixed match of at least my practice. It's rarely big projects that span over multiple days. It's usually a large number of smaller tasks. such as preparing an application or preparing a letter for a client to send out saying, hey, stop using our trademark or something similar, or responding to a report from the government trademarks examiner to say, hey, these are arguments why it should be approved, or drafting a contract. And on that side, it's usually a partner from the firm that gives me a contract to help out with, either by email or just coming in the office saying, hey, can you help me out with this? And that becomes the next task.
So I guess it's more, would you say at this firm that you have more flexibility with your schedule in terms of you have, your tasks that are assigned to you, but they're, like you said, they're a large amount of smaller tasks. And so it's kind of up to you when you work on them, as long as it's all done? Or is it like, I know for a lot of younger lawyers, it's a lot of, obviously you're going to be micromanaged to an extent because you just started off, but would you say you have more flexibility here now?
Absolutely, a lot more flexibility. Before at my firm, I couldn't even send an email sometimes, with 1 sentence, 2 sentence email without getting reviewed. So it's a big changer.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're new, that they would want to make sure that they kind of monitor what is happening. But it's good to know that, at a young age, you're still able to land a position at a firm where you're able to have that flexibility and kind of manage yourself to an extent. The next question that we have is, what kind of cases, or I guess what kind of, I know you probably have bigger clients to deal with than just like in comparison to family law or something like that, where it's one single individual or a whole family or something like that. But what kind of cases do you most commonly have? And were there any that really, really stood out to you?
I get a lot of business owners, small business owners, that either just started their business and want to protect their name, or are franchising, looking to franchise their business, which is what our managing partner, my boss, does. And a lot of those are restaurant owners or sometimes business consultants, startups that with like a website-based app business, mobile app business. As for cases that stand out, no one case stands out so recently, but I do get calls from people that unfortunately are like, oh, I've had this business for 2 years and selling products, yada, yada, yada. But then I got a letter from someone else saying that stop using this name because we have prior rights to a similar name. And that also happened. And unfortunately, there's not too much the client can do other than change the name and spend the cost to rebrand, and then make sure to file an application to properly protect their name.
So I guess just from what you're saying, I'm understanding a lot more the importance of kind of trademarking your, like protecting your name as a business, and your rights as a business as well, so you don't end up in the position of that client, for example. And my next question that a lot of students asked was, what is a common misconception about lawyers that you hear about the most? Maybe you heard this when you were in law school, maybe you hear it today, but what's one really common misconception about lawyers that you want to address?
Yeah, that you have to be, the misconception that you have to be outgoing or have a certain personality type to succeed. As I mentioned earlier, I consider myself an introvert, and there are other ways to put yourself out there. Networking is also a learned skill, and you just get used to it as you continue doing it. And you can find other ways, like writing articles or doing one-on-one meetings instead of going to these big conferences. So definitely that, because that's how I felt. That wow, all these guys are so outgoing.
I think everyone always thinks that there's one personality type that all lawyers possess. And so it's important to know that you don't have to be, outgoing, or there's always another misconception that I was talking to a lawyer about a few days ago was you have to be a really tough, cutthroat person to become a lawyer and to be a successful lawyer. And this lawyer, she was telling me, she's like, that's not true. Like you can be someone who's more laid back and kind of calm. And not someone who's very argumentative or anything like that, but you can still get things done and be a good lawyer for your clients. And so it's really like, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's the misconception that a lot of students hear as well. Like if I'm not a super outgoing person, or I don't have all of these extracurriculars, I wasn't super involved, I don't have a big circle, I'm not great at public speaking or whatever it might be, I'm not going to be a good lawyer. So I'm glad that you really addressed that. So that, again, another thing that's reassuring for students. And another question that we love asking the professionals always is, what advice would you give to your younger self prior to attending law school? So let's say that you could talk to your 21-year-old self. What would you tell him and why?
I think I covered some of that stuff, but I'll just focus on one that's more personal to me, and hopefully some people will relate as well. It was just to ask for more feedback and not to be afraid that that feedback might be negative. If they're thinking of something negative, or if they have a negative feedback, then they're already thinking it anyway. And you asking them can only help you. It shows to them that you care. And if it's professors you're asking, that's part of their job and what they love to do as well.
I think for sure, finding out, if someone has criticism, or especially constructive criticism, not being afraid to ask. And that kind of goes with pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and putting yourself in potentially uncomfortable situations, but whatever you are told is gonna help you only improve yourself. I think a lot of young students are scared to ask, like, what can I do to improve? Sometimes you don't want to hear anyone tell you, not because you're stubborn, but just afraid. You don't want to hear someone say, this is what you weren't doing right. But I think that, as you grow up, especially as a lawyer, you're going to make mistakes. And there's always a mentor or someone more experienced than you that can tell you or teach you more. So, and like even the position that you're in right now, technically as a mentor as well to students that are listening right now, like you telling us things that you didn't do is also kind of addressing things that maybe we're doing wrong or not realizing yet. So thank you for that as well. And then this kind of it's very related to what you just answered, but I mean, is there any other advice that you would give to like the next future generation of aspiring lawyers? So people like that are in their undergrad right now, is there any advice besides what you've already kind of touched on that you would give them?
Yeah, this one I won't take credit for. I just say I heard it somewhere and I really resonated with me. Try not to compare yourself too much to others, and instead compare yourself to who you were 6 months ago or a year ago to see how far you come.
I think that is really amazing. I mean, that one hit for me. So I'm sure that a lot of students would also relate to that one, especially a lot of students interested in law are constantly comparing themselves to what experience somebody else has. Like, oh, so-and-so worked at a law firm and I didn't. And therefore they're going to get a better,
so-and-so son of a judge. Yeah, that's going to happen.
The son of the judge one is just that's so common, or they have connections in their family and I don't, and so therefore I can't. But very, very important to anyone that is listening right now to make sure that you're not comparing yourself to other people. And I'm glad that you said to instead compare, like, if you're comparing yourself to someone that you were 6 months ago, that's a better comparison to make, because you're probably going to find that you have grown at a different rate than others, and that's totally fine. So thank you so much for touching on that. That is actually the bulk of our questions. You did answer a couple in, like, some of them I just took out because you answered them within your answers already, which is great. And it's honestly been a very helpful session. I do see that Gloria has raised her hand. I'm going to assume that you want to say something. I'm just going to unmute really quickly. Or sorry, ask you to unmute, Gloria.
Yeah, so I do have a couple questions. First of all, thank you so much for having this session with us and making the time in your busy schedule. When I came across your profile, I instantly felt this connection. I don't really know, I just felt it. And hearing you speak and your emphasis on this whole work-life balance in undergrad, like I'm in a sorority, so I just already feel like there's so many similarities. And my first question is, I remember you mentioned that you studied philosophy and psychology in your undergrad. So I'm just because, well, you chose those programs because you heard that statistically students who studied those programs showed better results and were really beneficial for LSAT and preparing for law school. So I'm wondering how much that actually did help you when writing the LSAT, because I also chose my program, International Development Studies, solely for the purpose of wanting to go to law school after.
Mhm. So psychology less so, that was just my personal interest. Where at first I was like, oh, if I go to law school, you can take any undergrad you want. But then once I was an undergrad, I was like, okay, let me be a little bit more calculated. Um, and philosophy did help, especially certain courses kind of set you up for one, reading comprehension, almost in the sense that because they're forcing you to read such old texts that are hard to read, that you kind of get better or faster at reading stuff like that. And then the other side is there's a logic course, and maybe without even doing a major like that, just taking that course as an elective would be helpful, just because it really teaches you and gets it ingrained in you, like the basic stuff like if A, then B, and the inverse of that is if not B, then A, as opposed to if B, then A. And that's going to show up on the LSAT, of course.
Thank you so much for your response. My second question is, I've noticed that your last name was Lee. So I'm respectfully assuming that you're Korean.
The other Lee, yeah, Lee is very popular.
Yeah, it's
Lee,
very.
this is the Cantonese Lee, the Hong Kong Lee.
Got it. So I'm just wondering, because I'm Korean, so I'm wondering if your parents had any contribution in your decisions in going to law, and if there were, like, I'm a first generation, and I don't really have a lot of mentors around me or people who work in law or any connections. So it's sort of hard to sort of deal with all the pressures that my parents give, but also, like, I'm wondering if you went through a similar experience.
For me, it was almost motivating for me that I would be the first in the family to be a lawyer. Not that they, like, my dad went to university, got a great job as an engineer. I thought that's not the path for me. But the way they did kind of influence, and maybe this is an Asian thing, that like lawyer, doctor, those are very respectable jobs. So me happening to like this was obviously well received. Me wanting to do this anyways without them pushing it. So I think that's it for that. They definitely, yeah, they didn't push me towards any particular career though.
And my last but definitely not least question is, would you, you did mention that you're still home right now, but when you do go back to office, I'm wondering if you're open to students reaching out to you for shadowing opportunities, because personally, I've been really interested in intellectual property law, and currently I've been working as a YouTuber and treating my brand as a self-employed business. So I'm constantly dealing with copyright issues. So I'm just wondering if you would be open to any of those opportunities.
Yeah, I hope I can take people in the future. Right now, it's still building out, and I don't have enough work where I can get someone. But definitely, when they hired me, they intended on me hiring another person or student, let's say, and building out the practice like that. But I'll definitely keep that in mind.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your response. I'm going to get back to give it to Aisha.
No, thank you so much for your questions, Lori. I'm glad that you asked, especially the one about, like, being a first generation immigrant or whatever it might be, like, did that play into like an account or play that a role into your decision to becoming a lawyer? And I'm glad that in your sense, your parents didn't push you towards any career. I'm sure they must have been like delighted that this is what you ended up choosing. Worked out really well in their favor. They didn't have to push you towards anything. But for people that are watching, like, I'm a first generation immigrant as well. I think a lot of us are for the most part. And I'm really glad that you said that it motivated you to become the first lawyer in your family instead of being something that was kind of daunting and scary. I'm sure at some points it might have felt like you don't want to disappoint anybody. But it's a very different way of looking at it, is being excited or motivated to kind of break that barrier and be the first one. So I think that's a really like nice note to end on, the fact that it's possible. And just because of your position or you don't have anyone in your family who's a lawyer or whatever it might be, doesn't mean that you're not going to make it in the end. Thank you again so much for speaking to us. I know this was very insightful for everybody. And if you don't have anything else that you would like to say, I can go ahead and wrap this up. And for those of you that are watching, I will be putting Avery's email in the description if you guys want to reach out with further questions or anything you want to say.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I wish this existed when I was still a student. Would have been nice.
For sure. I mean, this is why we started this, because me and Gloria were both like, we haven't applied for law school yet. And this is why we do what we do, because, we've had people on pre-law shadowers who joined and then because of these sessions realized they didn't want to do law. So it can go either way. But I'm glad that students that are also watching, if you are tuning in, like, it's so beneficial for your own future to just hear what real lawyers, people who actually went through everything instead of reading things online, you get to hear their experiences. And hopefully that makes you either more confident in your decision, whether it is to continue doing law or change your pathway. So thank you for helping and contributing to making that decision for people as well. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording.